What's up, everyone, and welcome back to Franchise Unfiltered, the show where we cut through the noise and give you an unbiased, unfiltered look at the reality of franchise ownership. Today, I want to respond to a video that Dave Ramsey put out talking about franchising. He made some points about franchising, and some of what he said is completely valid, and some of it I'd push back on. And there's a piece of the picture that he left out entirely, which I think matters a lot, especially if you're someone who's actually thinking about buying a franchise. So let's go through it. I'm going to play a little bit of the video to start, just to give you some context, and then I'm going to jump to a few specific clips, let you hear what Dave has to say on franchising, and then I will share my thoughts with you on it as well. So let's play the beginning of this just to give a little bit of context.
I own an indoor playground geared for ages 0 to 8. We host birthday parties, walk-in play, events, and just a lot of community activities. We are doing a revenue of about $250,000 since 2020.
Mm-hmm.
So we opened our first location in June of 20, and that was unintentional. We made it through. And we just opened our second location this past August, which is about 45 minutes south of our first location.
Mm-hmm.
The goal is to have another 2 locations in and around the Baton Rouge area. But after those initial 4 are open, I'm struggling where to take the business from there.
Mm-hmm.
Our business model is super scalable. It's easy to open up, but I do not have the capital to be able to grow as fast as I would like. So I'm trying to figure out if I should focus more on corporate owned with investors, or maybe look at the franchise route.
Okay. I have chosen to do neither. Instead,
okay, well, that's a good option too.
Yeah. Third option is grow slower. And I guess that would be corporate owned, if you want to call it that.
So basically, this lady's calling in. She's got an indoor playground concept in Baton Rouge. And by the way, I lived in Baton Rouge for a few years. Go Tigers. My wife went to LSU. Love Baton Rouge. One of my favorite places ever. And she's got a couple locations. She's looking to expand. She wants Dave's thoughts on how to do that, go raise capital, and keep opening up locations that way, franchise it. Dave says, there's a third option, which is just continue to grow at a slower pace, but basically cash flow the expansion so that you're not having to give away equity to investors or go the franchising route. So he spends a little bit of time talking about why he doesn't love the investor route. I'm not going to really get into that. I want to focus more on his thoughts on franchising. So I'm going to jump forward a little bit here to where he talks a little bit more about why he doesn't like the franchise.
Or the harder it is to sell a franchise, So
right.
Getting 100 franchise, the first 100 franchisees is obviously the most difficult thing. And then taking it huge is the next thing. But at that point, you're no longer in the playground business. You're now in the franchisor business. Your job is not to manage playgrounds anymore. Your job is to manage the relationships with the franchisee. And franchisees and franchisors have a love-hate relationship. It works like this. The franchisee buys the franchise from you in order to get your name, your operating template, and to live their dream of operating a small business. And they think that you have some special sauce that's going to help them have a higher likelihood than if they did it on their own of being successful. And so they love you, and you love them because they give you money up front, and then they give you 8.5. 5 years later, if they're unbelievably successful, they think it's because of them, not you. And they start to resent the 8.5% royalty that they're paying you. And you think the reason they're successful is because of you, not because of their hard work. And the truth is, it's both. They're successful because of you and because of their hard work. And they should honor their deal and keep using your name and keep doing this, but they want to get out of the franchise agreement and go open their own because now they're an expert playground operator, and now you get into all that junk, right? So that's part of the franchisee-franchisor process. Is it's just there's a lot of relational management, and you have to hold them accountable for sticking to the standards of your brand. You don't get to build a Subway sandwich two different ways. There's only one way to build a Subway sandwich, right?
Yeah, so valid points here, right? And this is something I have people ask me from time to time. Hey, I'm thinking about franchising my business. Where should I start, or what advice do you have? And it's one thing I always point out to people: your role as the founder of the company changes dramatically when you make that decision to franchise. In this case, they're talking about an indoor playground business, and Dave says you're no longer in the indoor playground business anymore. You're in the franchisor business. True. And that dynamic that he talks about, the franchisor to franchisee kind of love-hate relationship, that exists too, right? But I usually compare that in a healthy franchise system with franchise partners that are doing the right things, and everyone's trying to succeed, right? So everyone's kind of rowing in the same direction. I kind of compare it to most marriages or long-term relationships, right? If you really love the person that you're with, yes, you're going to have spats from time to time. The person, my wife would tell you there's, God knows how many things I do that drive her nuts on a regular basis. Doesn't change the fact that she loves me. It doesn't change the fact that, she wants to be with me. So I think in a lot of ways, in a healthy franchisor franchisee relationship, there's always going to be a little bit of that friction, but the bigger goal, the bigger picture is still there, and everyone's still kind of working towards the same end goal. But it is something to consider, and again, I think more than anything, it's just as the founder, your role changes pretty dramatically. um the whole resentment of, a franchisee once they've kind of learned the business and they've gotten themselves established and they've started to be successful. That can be a valid point, right? I mean, one thing I always coach people to try to get a sense of when they're looking at different franchises is, what is the value exchange between the franchisor and the franchisee? As Dave points out, I don't know if I played that clip or not, but you pay an initial franchise fee to join the franchise system, and then you're going to pay an ongoing royalty that's a percentage of your gross revenue. In the beginning, the franchisor's value to you is training, support, helping you learn the business quicker, helping you avoid mistakes that you would very likely make if you didn't have that guidance and support. Brand name, trademarks, all of that. Most franchisees will get to a point in their business, and that's kind of the goal, if you think about it, where they don't need a ton of support from the franchisor, at least in terms of here's how to operate the business. So, that's something to be aware of. The fees, the royalties are always going to be there. So you need to understand, okay, what's the upfront value that I can expect to get as a franchisee, but also what is the long-term value? And good franchises find ways to continue to add value to their franchisees, no matter how successful they are, no matter how established they are in their business. And, that value exchange can look different depending on the type of business that you're in. But, common examples, one of the biggest benefits to a franchise and them scaling their business is as an entire organization, they have buying power, right? So, whatever the business is, whether it's a food business, some sort of a business. We owned an insulation franchise, right? As that franchise system got bigger and bigger, we had leverage with the manufacturers and distributors of the insulation products that we were selling. So the franchisor was able to help negotiate on behalf of the franchisees to get better pricing for us. And in a lot of ways, that can offset the ongoing fees that you're going to have as a franchisee, the royalties. The franchise my wife and I still own, that we've owned for 8 years now, where we do custom shelving. The franchisor owns the manufacturing side of that business. We sell that product exclusively. No one else, other than Shelf Genie franchisees, are able to sell the product that we sell. And our cost of goods are substantially lower, and I would argue on a higher quality product than if we were in that same business independently and had to source products from a third party. So in that example, we're 8 years in. We don't need a ton of coaching or support from the franchisor in terms of how to run the business, but they provide a high quality product at a reasonable price that I'm the only one in my local market that has the ability to sell it. And the savings on the cost of goods alone in this particular example more than offsets the royalty that we pay. So that's another example of just how the franchisor can continue to add value to franchisees long term. So I don't have any resentment, in paying the royalty to that franchise. Yes, there's friction. There's things they do that I wish they would, do better, or there's things I wish they would focus more on. There's always going to be some of that, but it's never to the point where we're like, man, we should try to get out of our franchise agreement and just go do this on our own. Something else that doesn't come up that kind of ties into this, that, or at least that Dave doesn't bring up here, in another way that good franchise systems will continue to add value to their franchisees, it's the peer network, it's the community, it's the franchisee to franchisee relationships. This doesn't get talked about nearly enough, when we look at the pros or the benefits to going the franchise route. My wife, who primarily runs our franchise business, she's got 3 or 4 good friends that are franchisees in different parts of the country within the same franchise system, and they talk on a regular basis, right? And it's very, very helpful to have other people that are in the exact same business as you, so they understand the challenges that you have. They understand some of the headaches that can come with the businesses. They're out there trying different things, and when they come across something that's working well for them, they can come back and share that. Sometimes it's nice to just have someone to vent to, right? Someone that you can vent to that really understands what you're dealing with. And they're not competitors, right? So that's a huge value add long term that can come with franchising. So I'm gonna keep playing it here, because I think he gets into the cost of franchising a little bit more.
And so,
Right.
you're managing all of that. I will also tell you that the setup of becoming a franchisor and starting is super expensive. You've got these franchise disclosure documents that are as thick as an old-fashioned phone book, and they cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees to get that set up and get it ready, or $50,000 in legal fees to get it set up and get it ready. And it basically says all through this document all the different ways the franchisee is going to lose money, and they have to sign this disclosure because there's been so much fraud in this space. And so the feds are up in your business all the time while you're dealing with this, Federal Trade Commission. So franchising can be a huge deal. It can be a boon for the franchisee. It can be a boon for the franchisor, but those are some of the negatives that people don't see going into it that I'm well aware of, because we've walked with people through them in every one of those situations. So if I'm you.
Yeah, I mean, it's not inexpensive to franchise your business. I touched on this in another video recently. I'm trying to remember what the context was, but deciding to franchise your business is not a get rich quick strategy. You need a lot of capital in order to franchise your business and do it the right way. And it's a long runway, right? Once a company starts franchising, especially if it's brick and mortar, like what she's talking about right here, where there's a physical location, you're going to have to, help franchisees find a location, sign a lease, manage the build out. You're talking 6, 9, 12 months, depending on complexity of all of those things, until a franchisee is even opening their doors for business. And then there's, how long does it take the franchisee to ramp up and start generating enough revenue consistently to where the franchisor has good royalty revenue consistently coming in. It's probably one of the number one reasons that, young franchise concepts really struggle or ultimately don't make it, is that they were undercapitalized to start with when they made that decision to go into franchising. So I don't disagree with anything that he says there. If you're considering franchising your business, it's absolutely something you need to make sure you have realistic expectations on. How much capital do you need to franchise? There's a couple other clips here that I want to make sure we touch on. He goes into, FTC regulations and franchising. I think that's what he's getting ready to maybe touch.
For that reason, I'm going to avoid that. If I'm you, I'd rather just own it. I can control it. I can fire the guy if he's not running it, and I can get the thing back on track. And, or we can close an unprofitable location because it's a bad location, that kind of thing. And I don't need partners reading my mail every week trying to figure out how I'm running something. The only ship on sale is a partnership, and that's what an investor is. It's an unsaleable ship. So I think you got a great idea. I think you trust you.
I'm going to have to back it up and find where he talks about the FTC. But, when he talks about, being able to fire someone on your team if you're expanding through just organically opening locations, which is his advice to this lady. And he says it earlier in the video. I don't think I played the clip, but he says, hire as you start opening other locations, and especially as those locations get further and further away from where you physically are, hire people to run those locations, and incentivize them to think like business owners, which I totally agree, right? Whether you own a franchise, whether you own a non-franchise business, if you are hiring a key person and putting them in any sort of a role where they are going to be responsible for the profitability of the business, you need to make sure you have a comp plan that forces them to think like an owner. In other words, don't have a comp plan that is just tied to revenue growth, right? Because then they don't have really any real incentive to manage cost and protect the bottom line. You want them to think like an owner. Therefore, a good portion of their profitability should be, or I'm sorry, a good portion of their compensation should be based on the overall profitability of the business. What I don't love about that, or this is, I would say a benefit to going the franchising route, and it's why many companies decide to franchise, or at least a big part of why, is that it's very difficult to find and hire people, even if you have the incentives set up correctly. And there's tremendous upside in terms of their earning potential if they think like an owner and run the business profitably. It's very hard to find good, reliable people like that, especially if the goal is to build a national brand, right? With something like this, an indoor playground, with hundreds, if not, potentially multiple hundreds or even 1,000 locations across the country. That's a heavy lift to find that many people that have the qualifications and the aptitude to run it like an owner would. And so that's a big part of why franchising works so well, is because you're bringing in people that have real skin in the game, right? They're investing their own money. They're paying that franchise fee. They're signing the agreement. They're putting their own money into, the build out. So they've got real skin in the game. They're not going to just walk away because it gets a little bit hard. Right. And the types of people that are most likely to thrive in that type of a role, if you're going with the strategy Dave recommends, they don't want to work for someone else and have like a profit share thing. If they're gonna go through all that effort, they want to own it. right? One of the biggest reasons people get into business ownership in the first place is not just because of the money they can make while they own the business. It's so they can build an asset that they can potentially sell one day, right? So I don't disagree with Dave in the sense that, if you are going to expand through just organically opening, as he puts it, corporate owned locations, whoever you hire to run those locations absolutely needs to be incentivized to think like an owner, largely paid based off of the profitability of the business. But, that's much easier said than done, right? And it's not easy to, um, find great franchise partners. I think a lot of people think that, franchise companies are just like, hey, if you can, we used to call it the mirror test, right? If you can fog a mirror, then we'll sell you a franchise. I see brands take that approach, and they're shooting themselves in the foot, and they usually don't fare very well with that strategy. But I think a lot of people just kind of assume, hey, franchise company, they're trying to sell it to anyone and everyone that's willing to buy it. And the good franchises are not, right? They're vetting you just as hard as you're vetting them because you're a partner. And they want to make sure that you're the type of partner that they're looking for. So anyways, I think I got to find where he goes into the FTC regulations.
And you grow you. That's what I would do if I were in your shoes. But of course, you get to do it either way. And we're going to love you and help you, whichever of these three routes you choose to go. We don't mind. I don't thinking to the standards of your brand and go open their own, because now they're an expert playground operator, and now you get into all that junk, right? So that's part of the franchisee-franchisor process. Is it's just there's a lot of relational management, and you have to hold them accountable for sticking to the standards of your brand. You don't get to build a Subway sandwich two different ways. There's only one way to build a Subway sandwich, right? And so
Right.
you're managing all of that. I will also tell you that the setup of becoming a franchisor and starting is super expensive. You've got these franchise disclosure documents that are you hundreds of thousands of dollars and get it set up and get it ready. And it basically says all through this document, and it basically says legal fees to get that set up and get it ready, or $50,000 in legal fees to get it set up and get it ready. And it basically says all through this document, all the different ways the franchisee is going to lose money. And they have to sign this disclosure because there's been so much fraud in this space. And so the feds are up in your business all the time while you're dealing with this, Federal Trade Commission. So franchising can be a huge deal. It can be a boon.
So what he's talking about there is the fact that franchising is regulated by the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, which spot on. It is. He talks about the FDD, the franchise disclosure document, and how, basically it's just a long list of all the ways the franchisor can, I forget exactly how he put it, but charge the franchisee money. Not really. It's a contract, right? It's a contract just like you would have if you went into any other type of a business partnership. It's a contract. If you own a home, you've signed a mortgage agreement. That's a contract between you and the bank. Yeah, when you sit down and read it, if you sat down, and most people don't even read their mortgage agreement, but if you sat down and read your mortgage agreement, uh, it sounds very scary, right? The bank is absolutely got all the leverage in that scenario, right? That is a one-sided agreement, or at least heavily favoring the mortgage company. And franchise agreements are no different. But it's what I tell people is, listen, if you're going to buy a house, right? Number one, you should have done all your due diligence correctly up front, right? And one of the things you should be very confident is that you are in a financial position to be able to pay the mortgage, and you're going into that agreement with every intention to honor your side of the agreement, to pay the mortgage every month and pay it on time. And you're fully intending to do everything in your power to make that happen, right? And if that's the case, the vast majority, if not everything that's scary in that mortgage agreement never even comes into play, right? And it's the same thing with a franchise agreement in pretty much every analogy that you could compare it to with something like a mortgage, where yes, there's a lot of things that are going to be listed in that agreement that are if then scenarios, right? Those if then scenarios are there to protect everybody that's involved. So most of the things that would be scary to someone in a franchise agreement are not going to come into play as long as the franchisee is operating within the terms of the agreement, doing everything within their power to, be successful. And I can tell you this, I've been on the franchisor side. I've worked for multiple national franchisors, been on, parts of the leadership team. No franchisor is sitting around looking for reasons to throw the book at a franchisee. And if an issue arises, let's say it's related to, underperformance of a franchise location, right? The franchisor's um first step in this is all my experience, right? I'm sure there's exceptions to this, but in my experience, if you have an underperforming franchisee, and let's say that by the letter of the franchise agreement, they are performing at a level that would allow the franchisor to void their contract. No franchisor wants to have to do that, right? Their first option is going to be, hey, how can we help? How can we help you get this on track? How can we help you get this where you need to be? And it's again, in all of my experience, it's only after every other option has been exhausted that the franchisor would then terminate a franchisee. And that kind of leads me into, a few thoughts on the FTC regulations, where he says, it's highly regulated because there's been so much fraud. Maybe. I mean, I kind of look at this as, yes, there are some horror stories out there if you go searching for them with, franchise companies that have essentially defrauded their franchisees. But to me, it's kind of like plane crashes, right? Like, you don't see on the news every time a plane takes off and lands successfully, because it happens all the time, right? There's nothing exciting there. You see on the news when a plane crashes, right? Because that doesn't happen very often, and it's terrible, and the consequences are bad. And a lot of times there's someone that was at fault. Maybe there was negligence or something like that. It's kind of the same, with this. Like, yes, there have been horrible scenarios where franchisors have taken advantage of their franchisees and defrauded them. They're very few and far between. And you also have these types of things in every industry out there, right? Every type of business that you could consider getting into, you will be able to find horrible stories and horrible examples of fraud, right? So the fact that the FTC regulates this is a good thing. And in Dave's defense here, he's speaking to someone that's considering taking their business and franchising it. And I can kind of see his point, right? Like, you do need to be aware, like, hey, you're going to have to, abide by these FTC regulations if you want to be a franchisor. But if you're on the side of the table where you're considering buying a franchise, um, these FTC regulations are there to protect the buyers of franchises. That's largely what they are in place for. And so what that does is it gives you so much more insight into what the opportunity is that you're actually looking at. I don't know of really any other business opportunities that you could look at getting into where you have as much insight into what to expect than you do with a franchise, because of this franchise disclosure document that Dave is referencing, right? So the FDD is something that every single franchisor has to file with the FTC. They have to update this document at least once a year. It has a very detailed breakdown of what they call the estimated initial investment range, right? So that you're coming in eyes wide open in terms of how much capital do I realistically need to get this business up and running. That estimated initial investment range per the FTC regulations is required to account for a minimum amount of working capital, right? So this is not saying, hey, this is the bare minimum that you need to get your doors open for business. This is, hey, here's how much capital you need, plus, a nice cushion to make sure that you can cover the expenses to operate your business until you've had enough time to ramp up and you have, enough cash flow to sustain. You get data based on, the financial performance of the other franchisees. And if the franchisor is running their own locations, their own affiliate or corporate locations, you get all of that data as well. Data is not a perfect predictor. It's not a guarantee of any specific results, but you at least get a really good idea of like, okay, what does good look like in this business? What does average look like? What does below average look like? Whereas if you're just starting your own business, right? Yes, there's ways you can do research, you can look at competitors and things like that, but there's no regulation on any of that. People that are out there buying existing small businesses, it's not really regulated, right? In terms of, hey, here's my financials, here's my P&L and L and my balance sheet. Nobody's really regulating like how accurate are those numbers. I've seen so many examples of people that have bought an existing business thinking they were getting one thing, and then 3 months into it they're like, "What the hell? This is not what I thought I was getting." And so anyways, my point is just because of all the regulations in franchising, if you go through and do your due diligence the right way, there should not be any major surprises on the other end of becoming a franchisee. Major surprises in terms of, oh my God, I had no idea that I was going to have this fee. Or, oh my gosh, I had no idea it was going to cost this much to get the business open. There will be things that you probably did not fully understand or appreciate as you were going through the due diligence until you're in it, right? And this is something I think about a lot. I was having this conversation a week or so ago with a guy that I helped get into a franchise about a year ago, and we were just kind of talking through it. He's doing pretty well, but it's not been easy, and he knew it wasn't going to be um, effortless when he made the decision to get into it. But we just kind of got on this conversation of like, yeah, until you're actually in it yourself, doesn't matter how many other franchisees you talk to or how much research and due diligence you do, you're just not going to fully understand every aspect of what it's like to own that business. And um, we kind of came up as we were talking, we kind of came up with the analogy for any of you listening that are parents, you'll understand this. It's very similar to having a kid, right? If you've never had a kid and you're about to have your first kid, every parent you talk to is going to have advice for you. All right. Oh, it goes by so fast, enjoy the time when they're little, or, whatever the advice is that you hear from parents. And you're like, yeah, yeah, I get it. That makes sense. That makes a ton of sense. You don't fully understand it though until you have that kid and you're actually living it. So, but anyways, sorry, that was kind of a side quest there, but um, the FTC regulations are a good thing, right? Um, you don't have those same regulations and guardrails. Is it perfect? No. Are there, bad examples and horror stories that you can find in franchising? Sure. Right. But that's the world that we live in. Right. And so I guess my overall point is just that um, there's a lot of benefits to franchising. I don't really disagree with much of what Dave said here in terms of some of the things that, anyone considering franchising their business should be aware of. But I thought it was, um, was kind of an interesting take and wanted to share my thoughts on it. And I think one thing that, was a theme of all of Dave's comments here is that, you need to make sure you understand what you're getting into. All right. And do your research. Don't rush into something, whether that's you're considering franchising your business or you're considering buying into a franchise. You need to do your research, know what you're getting into with franchising. I say this all the time, but there are literally thousands of franchises out there. They're not all created equally. And so, you know, you need to know how to decipher which franchises are doing things the right way and which ones are not, which ones are really built to last, which ones are really view the relationship with their franchisees as a partnership. They don't view their franchisees as a means to an end. So I think, overall, go in with your eyes wide open. At the end of the day, business ownership is always a risk. But, if you're watching these types of videos, if you're, out there looking at different business opportunities, this is exactly what I do. I help people every single day who are evaluating business ownership. Some of them, franchising is something they're seriously looking at. For others, it's just something they're kind of curious about and they want to compare it to other options that they're considering. But my job is to help you figure this out. All right. Not to convince you that franchising is the end all be all or the best way. But it's to help you get a realistic, unfiltered, see what I did there? Understanding of what franchising is, whether it could be right for you. And if it could be right for you, help you figure out what types of franchises would be the best fit. 'Cause that's the other challenging part here. There's so many different types of franchises out there. So, process is completely free, no obligation. I'd love to talk with you if you are considering business ownership, curious about franchising. There will be a link to my calendar down below this video. Reach out to me, and I'd love to connect and see how I can help. Until then, we will catch you next time. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in.